came back into triathlons in about 2014, I just felt I was really more in my element, that I love trail running, but I wanted to get back to swimming, biking, and running, and I was able to do that, and then kind of move up through the ranks and be a top age grouper, and then started coaching triathletes, and now, working for TriDot and working with other coaches throughout the world, and did go back and did the Ultraman. I did it in 2013, and then in 2019 I was inducted into the Ultraman Hall of Fame. So that's kind of maybe longer than a minute or two, but that's about 40 plus years of just doing crazy stuff.
And you're still competing. You competed at the Ironman World Championships last year in Nice in your age group.
Yes, still very.
That was racing conservatively. You're still able to, be 12th overall.
Right, and I think as you and I know, that I was dealing with some things at that time, going into that race, that I wasn't probably just dealing with a medical issue. I wasn't on top of my game, but yeah, I think it's nice. There's great camaraderie. It's humbling, and I just love to race. And there's no secret there. There's something about racing that it just really it takes it up a notch. So I do enjoy that. I'm now getting ready for Texas, and then I've got Kona in October, and then I've got some other 70.3s this year. So it's a full year of racing.
In this last year, you've been exposed to the innovation of what we're doing with Vespa and with optimizing your fat metabolism, where we're coming from the backside and developing that foundational physiology. Tell us a little bit about our story and how that's worked for you.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. As we know that Mike Badger, just a great guy and a bike fitter. And it was probably a year ago in about February, just doing the bike fit, and he's real casual, like, oh, by the way, I want you to try these little packets. And I'm looking at him like, okay, I can actually read. Doesn't seem like there's much here for me. And I just kind of threw them in the car, and I think they sat there for a month. And Mike was very professional and persistent. So have you tried it? No, I haven't. Still doing my main thing and getting ready for Texas. And then one day I said, what the heck, I'm going to go ahead and kind of follow this protocol. And I was a little bit, I want to say a little bit, I was doubtful. Let's just put it out there that I was kind of that trained because of everything that we've done. I'm hitting my 300 calories per hour. I'm definitely loading up a lot of glycogen and gels and carbo fuel and all that stuff. And I'll tap that out, that I'm going to make some adjustments. And I'll tell you, that was an eye-opening experience, that I'm like, wait a minute. So I'm only going to have 15 calories, a little bit of breakfast, take this 30 minutes before, 90 minutes into it. I'm going to have another one, and I'm only going to have 100 calories. I'm going to cut my caloric intake. I'll blow up, or I'll just bonk on the bike. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. And I think for me, Peter, the turning point, I know I did one race rehearsal before Texas, and it was 5.5 hours, so I was right around 112 miles, and I averaged 20 miles an hour. I think my caloric intake was 400. I followed the Vespa protocol, cut back on those carbos, and I got off that bike and ran for 40 minutes. I'm like, whoa, what an epiphany. This feels good. It just felt good.
How'd you recover?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. Just being able to run that well for 40 minutes, and the next day I think I had a 2-hour run. I'm like, oh my goodness. And then you and I kind of putting our heads together of really studying, Texas and saying, hey, we know the heat, we know the humidity, this is what we want to do. And it's just at that point I had that confidence to say I can always have an extra something if I need to, but I'm really going to try to reduce those simple sugars as long as possible, really utilize burning my fat. And I think you and I in our conversations, that based on what you know about me, that my body metabolizes fat pretty well. And I think that really, really helped me out. So I could run
metabolic fitness. And I think you said you were 38 minutes ahead of your calculated time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always a game for me that I play. I love a challenge. So yeah, I was about 38 minutes ahead of my predicted time, but I think it was not only a great race as far as the execution, but I remember the next day, probably the adrenaline was still factored into this, but I know in the next day I was in the airport doing running drills, and my wife's like, I thought you just did an Ironman. I'm like, well, I did, but my legs want to move.
And you placed well in your age group. Was it third or fourth? at that point?
I think on that race I think I was fourth, a very competitive field, but I felt real good about my execution. And that's early in the year. I think for me, I'm more of an athlete that I try to put more stock into the second half of the year, kind of in the playoffs. And I know too that in my age group, I'm coming up, meaning that I'm almost out of my age group. So I get a lot of people that are just coming in at their
Well,
first year.
you had a pretty aggressive race schedule leading up to Nice last year.
I did. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I went from, my memory serves me correct, that I went from Texas, and then my next race I was at Honu, and that's a very warm 70.3 on the Big Island, and always an opportunity to try out Vespa again. But I had that same experience, and I won my age.
Coeur d'Alene.
That was after Hanu. I was getting there, Peter. You're one
Okay,
chapter
sorry.
ahead of me.
Okay.
So yeah, I had done Hanu and I won that, and then I actually went to Coeur d'Alene for a fall, and the weather was much more forgiving in Coeur d'Alene, and that worked out well. That I was second in my age group at Coeur d'Alene, and felt real good about my performance there.